Looks like Ilhan Omar just woke up to a nightmare today. Check this out.
Yeah, Bill, good morning to you. Federal agents are now on the ground in the Twin Cities, focusing on the Somali community and anyone who is in the country illegally. We know they have been stopping some folks out on the street asking for their IDs.
88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody say, oh, that's not...
So what you heard the president say today was that he is incompetent and incapable of being a president for the people of the United States, because he just said out loud that he despises Americans.
Also going door to door looking for specific individuals.
Wow, they're going door to door. ICE agents are going door to door looking to deport folks that are in the Minnesota area. This is a new level of aggression here, folks.
Door to door looking for specific individuals. All of this, as you mentioned, comes after those massive fraud schemes in Minnesota that involved mostly folks from the Somali community, fraudulently charging the state more than $1 billion for social services that were never performed.
Wow, this is arguably easily one of the biggest welfare fraud schemes that we've seen in American history. And it all is tying back to Ilhan Omar's hometown. It's wild here. And it looks like they're not playing with the whole deportation thing here. Ladies and gentlemen, this entire meltdown begins with one number. $3,047. Now, this is the unpaid lien sitting on Jasmine Crockett's Dallas condo, months overdue, according to county records. Now, is this an HOA due? Is this an HOA fine? Anyone with an HOA right now, does $3,000 per month for an HOA sound expensive to you? Well, yet this is the same woman who goes on television screaming about justice, accountability, and protecting democracy. But when it comes to handling her own finances, silence, excuses, defection. I mean, this wasn't just a clerical error. This wasn't a glitch. County filings show the lien was issued, it was ignored, and allowed to grow. Meanwhile, Crockett strutted around Washington, D.C. as if she had everything under control. And the moment that this lien surfaced, oh, guys, it didn't just expose a financial problem. This exposed a pattern inside the squad. This is a pattern of loud, moralizing, paired with messy, chaotic, personal decisions that the media never even wants to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, because what just detonated in Washington, D.C., this is bigger than a lien. It's bigger than a paperwork dispute. This is way bigger than Jasmine Crockett ever expected. So today, we're not just talking about this $3,000 unpaid lien on a luxury Dallas condo. No, the scandal has ripped open the entire squad money pipeline, and the fallout is already spreading to Rashida Tlaib's luxury limo spending, Ilhan Omar's $1 billion welfare fraud firestorm, and even Jamal Bowman's humiliating political collapse, folks. And the moment that reporters connected Jasmine Crockett's lien to this growing pattern of financial chaos, she erupted live on camera. You're about to see why Democrats behind the scenes are completely panicking, why staffers are scrambling, why the media is suddenly silent, and more importantly, why this one lien, just $3,000, has become the spark that just blew apart the most controversial faction in the Democratic Party. Because when Jasmine Crockett was pressed about Tlaib's limos, she snapped. When Omar's billion-dollar fraud questions were raised, she melted down. And when Bowman's collapse was mentioned, the entire room shifted. This is not just a scandal, folks. Clearly, this is a pattern. Clearly, this is a pipeline. And this is also a wake-up call in President Donald J. Trump's America, where accountability is finally back on the table. So stay right where you are. You're about to hear every second of what happened next. Hit the like button and subscribe, folks.
For social services that were never performed. When Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who's become the face of the Somali community in Minnesota, was asked why the fraud got so out of control, she said this.
Oh, this is interesting.
I think what happened is that, you know, when you have these kind of new programs that are designed to help people, you're oftentimes relying on third parties to be able to facilitate. And I just think that a lot of the COVID programs that were set up, they were set up so quickly that a lot of the guardrails did not get created.
So we're going to blame the guardrails. Hey guys, so look at your screen right now. Let me know if you think that this list is complete. Are these really the worst 5 Democrats? I mean, I'm looking at the list here. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. pause the screen if you need to. Let me know if there's any Democrat that's missing from the list of 5 worst Democrats. Now, the moment that reporters asked her the obvious question, why didn't you pay your lien? Crockett exploded. Not clarified, not corrected, exploded. There's a big difference there. She accused journalists of twisting stories, accused critics of right-wing obsession, and even suggested that the public didn't deserve to know the details. Isn't she an elected official? I mean, you may have voted for her. Maybe you didn't vote for her, but don't you think that the public deserves a response, an answer for why she's not paying these liens? I mean, the meltdown went viral instantly, not because of what she said, but more importantly of how she said it. Her tone was defensive, it was dismissive, it was arrogant, it was kind of bougie too. Her posture was aggressive. Her answers were evasive. And every time that a reporter brought up the unpaid lien, she shifted the conversation, lashed out, or blamed somebody else. Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't confidence. This was panic disguised as anger, and Democrats are watching this thing unfold. Her reaction didn't put out the fire. All it did was pour gasoline on it. Now, ask yourself this. Is your Medicare plan helping your retirement, or is it hurting it? The wrong plan eats away at savings year after year. Do you want your savings eaten away year after year? Now, right now, millions of retirees are getting these messages from their doctors that are saying, we will no longer accept your insurance next year. Call Chapter to get your new coverage. This is why I partner with Chapter, folks. They make Medicare strengthen your retirement instead of draining it. Now, one of our viewers told me, Chapter saved me thousands. My Medicare plan finally works for me. So let me ask you, do you want your retirement drained? Or do you want to do what most people already do and protect it? Now, most people, they're calling the phone number right there at the bottom of your screen, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron. Oh, and by the way, I just want to say, I see your messages, folks. Terrence D. Scott, he left me a message saying, just wanted to say thank you for Chapter. They saved me $60 a month. That is real money back in someone's pocket. And Kristen Mass said that Chapter took almost no time, and her mother is now saving money too. Stories like that really kind of remind me why I partner with Chapter in the first place. So I really appreciate you guys leaving your comments. They are not going unheard, and I read all of your comments. So thank you so much for that.
Our country should be more fearful of white men across our country, because they are actually causing most of the deaths within this country.
Is that a man?
Just so we're abundant.
Obviously, I'm just kidding, guys. I'm just messing with you. And well. Guess who introduced the bill that Somalians in Minnesota used to steal $1 billion from American taxpayers? The Meals Act. And here's where everything goes from embarrassing to unbelievable, because while Jasmine Crockett refused to pay a $3,000 lien, public filings are showing that she was simultaneously burning through over $75,000 in donor money on luxury hotels, high-end travel, chauffeur transportation, and even private security. Now, let me repeat that. She couldn't pay her condo bill. I don't know if this is a HOA fee, an HOA fine, but donors paid for her luxury lifestyle. Does that sound fair? 5-star hotels, black car services, first-class experiences, funded by the very voters that she claims to be fighting for. Now, this wasn't survival spending. This was indulgence, pure and simple, folks. And once the public connected these receipts to her unpaid lien, the outrage didn't just build, it erupted, because nothing screams public servant like living in luxury while falling behind on your own bills, right? I mean, this is where people really started asking the big questions. If this is how she handles her own finances, how is she going to handle ours?
We don't get enough money. I mean, I'm being honest, and I know that some people may take issue with that because they talk about how much money we make, and I get it. It's not that we're obviously getting minimum wage, but by the time you talk about having it.
Now, let's be clear. Jasmine Crockett making $174,000 a year in Congress as a Texas Democrat lawmaker is saying that this is not enough money to live on. Now, obviously, she's a little out of touch, because I think some people might be scraping by on less than $174,000 a year. But apparently for her, it's just not enough money. And the average person just may not understand where she's coming from. But the average Texan makes $52,885 a year. Now, I don't know if you're making more than $174,000 a year, or if you're making someone in the ballpark of $174,000 a year like Jasmine Crockett, but evidently it's not enough money. And she also has a mortgage. So this is why she needs more money.
We don't get enough money. I mean, I'm being honest. And I know that some people may take issue with that because they talk about how much money we make. And I get it. It's not that we're obviously getting minimum wage. But by the time you talk about having I have a mortgage and I have an interest rate that is like 3%.
So she calls out the fact that she has a mortgage because I don't know. Is she saying that because no one else has mortgages but her? Does anybody else have a mortgage? And her mortgage is a whopping 3%. Now, she's complaining about a 3% mortgage. Is there anyone out here watching the show with a mortgage rate greater than 3%? Because she's complaining with 3%. I'm pretty sure that there might be one or two people out there that would be more than happy to trade places with Jasmine Crockett and get that 3% mortgage because evidently it's too high for her.
But by the time you talk about having I have a mortgage and I have an interest rate that is like 3%. Interest rates are not that low anymore, right? That's
3%.
Number one. Number two, so it's a matter of, do you sell your home, then go somewhere else and get a higher interest rate? Like there's all these variables. And as a single woman who has one income, who's not allowed to make outside income, there's a lot of we don't. Man,
oh man, I know some people are tearing her up because I already know my mom was my mom was a single parent and she would have loved to have $174,000 a year salary income. And I don't know how this particular single mom as a Texas Democrat is unable to get by, but something is clearly wrong with the finances. And if she's not able to get by on that, maybe this is why they're trying to get so many Democrats out of office because they're mismanaging the books. But here's where Democrats really started to panic because Jasmine Crockett's scandal didn't just stay Crockett's problem for long. In fact, reporters immediately started drawing these parallels to Rashida Tlaib, who spent tens of thousands of dollars on luxury limousines in just 1 year. Wow, that's a lot of limousines, right? Or very expensive ones. High-end black cars, full chauffeur service paid for with campaign funds. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from Crockett has a lean problem to the squad has a financial culture problem. Tlaib's limos, Crockett's luxury hotels, both paid with donor cash. Has anybody ever ridden in a limo before? Like, I think I have when I was a kid. I don't even remember. But anyway, both were wrapped in the same pattern of entitlement and financial recklessness. And when reporters pressed Crockett on whether her spending was similar to Tlaib's, she snapped hard. I mean, that reaction right there, it pretty much told the whole story right there, because when the scandals line up this perfectly, they're no longer coincidences. Does anybody else believe in coincidences? Because I don't. And just when you thought that the scandal couldn't drag in anyone else, in walks Ilhan Omar with a brand new headline that blew Washington wide open. You see, a massive $1 billion welfare fraud network inside of her district. And the question that everyone asks is simple. What did Omar know? What did Ilhan Omar know? And what didn't she know? Like, when did she know it, more importantly?
The Twin Cities for its next immigration crackdown. City officials say as many as 100 federal agents are expected to be deployed in both Minneapolis and St. Paul in the coming days. This new ICE effort will focus on Somalis that are here illegally with final deportation orders.
Focus on Somali immigrants living unlawfully here. The expectation is that starts this week. Today, those Twin Cities leaders offered a show of support for the Somali community, and the mayor of Minneapolis says he believes ICE will break the law and sweep up American citizens.
Somali people means that due process will be violated. Mistakes will be made. Will be detained for no other reason than the fact that they look like they are Somali.
Somali people in Minnesota have a legal right to be here. About 80,000 Somali people, more than any other state in the nation. And CARE estimates about 95% of them are U.S. citizens. Carter calls the president's recent rhetoric racist.
And so now, this is what no one is saying. Okay, no one is saying Ilhan Omar orchestrated the fraud. That is not what we're saying. We're not saying Ilhan Omar was the ringleader or that, but the optics here, they're terrible, because this wasn't one This wasn't just like one guy in a basement. This was a sprawling, organized scheme happening right under her nose. And the timing just couldn't be any worse. I mean, Jasmine Crockett is already drowning under her own lean scandal. Rashida Tlaib is getting hammered over limos, and Jamal Bowman, that dude's gone. And so now Omar gets hit with $1 billion fraud question mark, which basically suddenly makes Jasmine Crockett look less like an isolated incident and a lot more like a kind of like a wider pattern of squad mismanagement, if you will. Now let's talk about Jamal Bowman, shall we? I mean, the squad member who fell so hard, he left a crater behind him. Because remember, this is the guy who pulled a fire alarm during a critical vote, then tried to explain it away like nobody had ever seen an alarm before. Okay, yeah, but it wasn't just the fire alarm, dude. It was the ethics issues. It was the credibility issues. And then came the primary defeat, a political wipeout that was so devastating that it sent shockwaves through the Democratic Party. Now, Bowman was supposed to be untouchable. But once voters saw the pattern, erratic behavior, questionable decisions, chaotic leadership, they tossed him out. I mean, this is why Democrats are terrified right now, because Crockett isn't just facing a lean. She's staring at the exact same trajectory that ended Jamal Bowman's career. So a lot of people are saying, you know, this may very well be the very first Texas Democrat to go down. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Things get real interesting here because, I mean, behind these polished press releases and canned statements, Democrats are in absolute panic mode. I mean, staffers are whispering, strategists they're meeting off camera. Party insiders are desperately trying to figure out like how the squad became a political liability overnight, because it's not just Crockett's lean or Tlaib's luxury limos or Bowman's or how about Ilhan Omar's $1 billion fraud shadow or even Jamal Bowman's collapse. It's the pattern. It's the trend. It's the smell of a faction that's spiraling out of control. And now every Democrat running in 2026 is pretty much, you know, they're terrified that this scandal is going to drag them right along down with it. And they're asking the very same questions. Is Jasmine Crockett the next Bowman? Is this whole wing about to explode? Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just some minor concern. This is full-blown survival level scrambling behind closed doors. Is anybody else seeing this? Yes or no down below, guys. And right when the story hit critical mass, guess who showed up? Not to investigate, but to cover. Mainstream media news outlets immediately tried spinning the narrative. Oh, it's just some small itty bitty lean. I don't know about you, but $3,047 is not really a small lean. I'm just saying. I mean, there are bigger ones, but okay. Then they're saying, oh, everyone has paperwork issues. Everybody? Comment down below if you have a lien outstanding that you haven't paid, guys, or is this a unique problem to Jasmine Crockett? Oh, then they'll say, oh, this is just being blown out of proportion. Give me a break. Give me a freaking break. I mean, if a Republican was missing a parking ticket, right or wrong, CNN, MSNBC, they will be running a countdown clock. MSNBC will be calling it a threat to democracy. But Jasmine Crockett ignores a lien for months. Tlaib spends donor cash on limos. Ilhan Omar faces $1 billion questions. Jamal Bowman implodes. And suddenly the press loses its voice. Ladies and gentlemen, the media didn't just downplay the story. They buried it right up until social media blew the lid off anyway. And right on cue, Jasmine Crockett rolled out the oldest play in the Democratic playbook. This is a right-wing smear, is what she said. Not here's the documentation. Not here's what actually happened. Like what happened was, no, none of that. Not here's why the lien went unpaid. Let me explain. No, just blame conservatives, blame the media, blame the critics, blame the whole timing of everything, blame the universe, blame her landscaper. I don't know. But here's the thing. Here's the part she can't spin. The lien is real. The spending files are real. The meltdown on camera is real. So when Jasmine Crockett snapped back at reporters calling it politically motivated harassment, That clip went mega viral. I mean, not because people believed her, but more importantly, because the blame game made her look even more guilty. It made her look even more rattled and even more caught off guard. Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't strength. This was a politician realizing the narrative has gotten away from her. And so this is where everything snaps into place, because Jasmine Crockett's scandal, it isn't just her. It's not just her scandal. This is the latest chapter in what people are now calling the squad money pipeline. Think about it, okay? Jamal Bowman collapses under ethics and erratic behavior. Rashida Tlaib, what'd she do? She got exposed for tens of thousands of dollars in limo spending. Ilhan Omar faces billion-dollar fraud questions. And now Jasmine Crockett, unpaid lien, luxury travel, donor-funded lifestyle, different situation, same pattern, money mismanaged, accountability ignored, excuses recycled. And so the moment Crockett lashed out at reporters, voters instantly connected the dots. This isn't random. This is systemic. This is why the scandal is snowballing. Not because of one lien, but because it confirms what millions already suspected, that the squad talks about protecting people while treating donor money like a personal luxury fund. Now let's talk about the part Democrats really don't want you thinking about: Jasmine Crockett's future ambitions. Because insiders in Washington, yes, even Democrats, they have whispered for months that Jasmine Crockett is eyeing a state run. Now, she wanted to elevate her career. She wanted to elevate her profile, expand her influence way beyond where she's at. She wanted to become the next rising star of the squad. But now every strategist in the party is quietly backing away from her. You know that Homer Simpson meme where he kind of like steps back into the bushes? Yeah. This lien scandal combined with the $75,000 spending spree, the meltdown on camera, the comparisons to Tlaib and Omar, this has turned her political brand radioactive. Nobody wants to attach their name to somebody who looks like the next Jamal Bowman, right? Nobody wants to defend a candidate whose scandal is spiraling into a full squad-wide financial expose. And the brutal truth, this could be the moment Jasmine Crockett's ambition hit a ceiling that she'll never be able to break through. And finally, there's one piece of the story that changes everything, okay? So Donald J. Trump is president of the United States again. For 4 years under Biden, scandals like this were brushed aside. Clerical errors, misunderstandings, Republican talking points, you name it, right? But in Trump's era, accountability is back. Federal agencies aren't looking the other way. The media can't control the narrative like they used to. And voters, after watching years of excuses, they have finally lost patience with politicians who misuse money, dodge responsibility, or hide behind identity politics. So when Jasmine Crockett's lien surfaced, when the $75,000 spending spree came out, how about the connections to Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Jamal Bowman came undeniable? This wasn't just a scandal at this point. This was a test, and Democrats failed spectacularly. The message in Trump's America is simple. If you mishandle the people's trust, you will be exposed. It didn't stop at Minneapolis nonprofits. It didn't stop at community organizations. No, the dollars kept moving straight into remittance networks leading into Somalia. And not just random transfers. We're talking identical clusters, repeating amounts, flagged routes, the same transfer chains U.S. intelligence has monitored for years. When Minnesota went from something feels off to, oh my God, this is massive, okay? Because when Trump's federal audit teams stepped inside the state's Medicaid and housing systems, the numbers didn't whisper fraud. They screamed it. Autism therapy spending didn't grow. It detonated from $2.6 million to $122 million in a matter of years. Housing stabilization services spending didn't rise. It exploded straight through the ceiling, landing at levels analysts say are mathematically impossible without organized fraud. Then the hammer dropped. The same suspicious patterns found in the $300 million Feeding Our Future meal scam suddenly appeared inside the Medicaid system. Same structure, same paperwork, same coordinated signatures. This wasn't sloppy. This wasn't accidental. This was a network. And when Trump saw that, he knew Minnesota wasn't dealing with a glitch. It was dealing with a machine. And now this is where the room starts spinning, because once analysts traced the Minnesota money, they realized that the money trail didn't end in the U.S. City Journal blew this wide open. Fraudulent benefits, autism therapy money, HSS housing funds, and meal program cash were flowing into money traders who operate in districts where known extremist presence exists. Millions in taxpayer cash funneled out of Minnesota infrastructure, drifting 6,000 miles into regions American counterterror agencies have been watching like hawks. This wasn't a crack in the system. This was a pipeline that finally triggered the federal alarm. Now, here's where the entire country stopped and said, hold on, what? Because when Treasury analysts flagged that suspicious remittance pattern, national security teams were pulled in immediately. And the moment that those experts saw the transfer routes, they recognized them like fingerprints. Why? Because they matched known pathways used in previous terror financing investigations that were tied to Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda linked extremist group that was embedded in parts of Somalia. Now, let me be extremely clear here. Federal agencies have not declared that Minnesota welfare dollars directly funded terrorism. That statement has not been made. But you know what has been said? That the financial patterns are so concerning, they're so eerily similar to flagged extremist roots that the entire operation was escalated into a national security priority under President Trump. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why Ilhan Omar's voice cracked. That is why she panicked, because the moment terror links are even suspected, the gloves come off. And so what does Ilhan Omar do when she realizes Trump's investigators are not backing down? She rushes onto a stage in Minneapolis and unleashes one of the most unhinged, emotional, frantic speeches of her entire political career. She's pointing at reporters, she's shaking her head aggressively, she's shouting about lies and bigotry and xenophobia. She's saying there is not a single piece of evidence, over and over and over. I mean, like, here's the problem, guys. You don't go DEFCON 1 in front of cameras if you feel safe. You don't panic if you know you're clean. You don't melt down publicly when you're confident that the truth is on your side. No. This is damage control. This is desperation. This was someone who just realized that the federal government wasn't going to just sweep this under the rug anymore. And, well, the more she shouted, the more Trump leaned in. And then here comes President Donald J. Trump standing in front of reporters like a man holding every receipt in the room. A journalist asks him, what do Somalians have to do with this? And Trump doesn't blink. He doesn't soften it. He doesn't do the politician tap dance. He says Somalians have caused a lot of trouble. They're ripping us off for a lot of money. We're not taking their people anymore, and we're getting a lot of their people out. Boom. The moment he said that, the political earthquake hit, because that wasn't commentary. That wasn't a threat. That was policy direction from the President of the United States. Democrats nearly collapsed. Omar nearly fainted. Twitter turned into a war zone. Why? Because Trump had just reframed the fraud scandal. That wasn't about, improper paperwork. This wasn't about administrative oversight. This was about national security and immigration integrity. And Trump wasn't backing down at all. Within days of Trump's comments, the federal government moved like a SWAT team, but on paper. No tanks, no troops, just investigators, analysts, and auditors with badges and subpoenas. The DOJ expanded its fraud task network in Minnesota. DHS pulled immigration reports and records for every high-risk suspect. Treasury investigators widened their remittance tracking net, flagging unusual transfer clusters in real time. Federal Medicaid auditors began digging through 5 years of claims, line by line, every line. This wasn't a review. This was a government-wide sweep, a coordinated crackdown designed to expose every shell company, every false claim, every dollar that vanished into thin air. Insiders even said Trump instructed agencies to treat every unexplained transfer as suspicious until proven otherwise. Suddenly, Minnesota wasn't a state with a fraud problem. It was a crime scene under federal excavation. And every new discovery made Ilhan Omar's political world smaller and Trump's momentum bigger. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is where the Democrats start running. I mean, the moment that Trump's federal teams began digging, Minnesota's Democratic leadership transformed from nothing to see here, folks, to we are deeply concerned overnight, kind of like flipping a switch. Governor's office suddenly blaming administrative breakdowns, Minneapolis officials holding press conferences trying to look shocked. Local Democrats quietly scrubbing statements where they dismissed early whistleblowers as racists. Even national Democrats began whispering about Ilhan Omar being a political liability. And why? Because the scandal wasn't just fraud anymore. It wasn't just paperwork anymore. It wasn't even a policy embarrassment anymore. It was $100 million plus in taxpayer money vanishing through networks under the very noses of leaders who spent years telling everyone that the system was strong, the oversight was tight, and the critics were bigots. And now their entire narrative is collapsing. and Trump is the only one holding the spotlight. Now, to really understand how deep this hole goes, you've got to connect the dots, because Minnesota isn't dealing with one scandal, it's dealing with a fraud ecosystem. First, there was Feeding Our Future, the massive $300 million meal scam that made national headlines. Fake food sites, phantom children, nonprofits popping up overnight like mushrooms. That case alone should have triggered the toughest oversight crackdown in state history. But instead, the same patterns, same communities, same document structures, same funding loopholes, they started popping up in autism therapy claims. Autism spending jumped from $3 million to nearly $400 million. Let that sink in for a second, okay? At the same time, the Housing Stabilization Services Program detonated from pocket change into a $122 million cash fire. These weren't random events. These were parallel fraud pipelines feeding off weak oversight and political protection. And Trump's investigators, well, they're now pulling all of those threads together. Then came the moment that shook the entire Somali diaspora in Minnesota. Arrest number 74. Ahmed Naji Sheikh, taken into custody, accused of laundering taxpayer dollars stolen in the Feeding Our Future operation. And he wasn't some random guy in the background. He was the brother of Abi Aziz Farah, the man slapped with a 28-year federal prison sentence for stealing more than $50 million. $50 million. Think about that, guys. These weren't petty thieves. These weren't desperate families. These were organized criminal networks operating inside Minnesota for years. Community leaders rushed to try and contain the fallout, begging the public not to judge everyone, but the damage was already done. And behind closed doors, federal agents hinted that more arrests were coming, many more. Suddenly, Omar wasn't defending a policy position. She was defending a community in shock as Trump's investigators started closing in. And this right here, guys, this is where Democrats realized that the storm wasn't just financial. It was political Armageddon. Republicans unleashed the full artillery. They blasted Minnesota's leadership for ignoring warnings. They called out state officials for labeling whistleblowers as racist. They demanded accountability for years of oversight failure. Conservative media turned the scandal into a symbol of everything broken in progressive governance: weak enforcement, identity politics over security, and a willingness to look away if the fraudsters belong to a protected political demographic. And Trump, he weaponized the truth. He tied Minnesota's scandal to immigration, national security, border integrity, and the failure of sanctuary-style politics. His supporters said what millions were already thinking. Trump did in weeks what Democrats refused to do for a decade. Meanwhile, Democrats could only react, scrambling, sweating, stumbling through talking points, because every new arrest was another strike against them. And right when Ilhan Omar thought things couldn't get any worse, the internet said, "Oh, we're not done." Suddenly, old reports, clips, and commentaries about Omar's Somali family background, they resurfaced everywhere, not as confirmed facts, but as widely circulated allegations the media never wanted discussed. Claims that her family wasn't fleeing oppression, but fleeing losing power. Claims that they were part of a political elite in Somalia tied to factions and tribes at the top of the system before the country collapsed. Now, again, we're not declaring these claims as factual, but they resurfaced because people were asking a simple question. Why is she panicking this hard, right? Add in Somali tribal politics, long-standing rivalries inside the diaspora, and the perception that Ilhan Omar represents one group over others, and suddenly, well, her meltdown looked less like moral outrage and more like political survival. Well, the storyline shifted from fraud to loyalty, and America was watching this happen. By now, the truth is undeniable. Minnesota is no longer a state scandal. It's the epicenter of a national reckoning. President Trump's vow to take back Minnesota wasn't a campaign slogan. This was a presidential directive. His investigators uncovered a pattern that was so massive, so interconnected, so reckless that states across the nation are now checking their own books in panic. This is no longer just a fraud case, guys. This is a national security emergency unfolding right here at home. And the moment Tim Walz was confronted about it on live television, he broke. He cracked. He collapsed in real time, blaming Trump, blaming prosperity, blaming pretty much everything except the one thing that mattered: his own administration's failures. So tonight, President Trump's DOJ is watching, federal prosecutors are watching, and millions of Americans are watching the same question explode across the country. How did Minnesota become $1 billion cash pipeline, and why was Tim Walz fighting harder to silence the whistleblowers than the criminals when over 480 Minnesota state employees, not some activists, not some politicians, but actual workers inside of Walz's own Department of Human Services stood up and publicly accused their governor of facilitating fraud? That alone would have been historic. But what happened next is what turned this into a political nuclear event. Their statement didn't go viral. It went thermonuclear, tens of millions of views in hours, spreading across Minnesota, across all 50 states, and straight into Washington, D.C. They said Walz didn't just ignore fraud. He built the environment that allowed it. He shielded the people doing it, and he retaliated against anyone who tried to expose it. Now, think about it. Why would you do all of those things? As a governor, why would you block all of those investigations? Are those the acts of a guilty man? Drop a guilty if you think Tim Walz was in on it. Now, this wasn't a complaint. This was a public mutiny against their own governor. Now, if you think Tim Walz is innocent, drop an innocent down below. And so once you have that many insiders revolt all at once, something is deeply, catastrophically wrong. Now, let's take this a little bit deeper, because the whistleblower revolt, this wasn't just one program or one rogue nonprofit. This is about an entire fraud architecture that's operating under Tim Walz's watch. We're talking about the now infamous Feeding Our Future scandal, over $250 million stolen from federal child nutrition programs during COVID. Now, that alone would have been one of the largest fraud schemes in U.S. history. But according to the federal prosecutors, state auditors, and now these 480 plus DHS employees, that was only the entry point into something far bigger. In fact, something far darker. And the DOJ says that the real number now exceeds $1 billion across multiple Minnesota programs. And the whistleblowers, they're saying that the final number could reach an unimaginable $10 billion. $10 billion. Vanished through nonprofits, shell restaurants, fake meal claims, and politically protected networks. This wasn't fraud. This was industrial scale looting of the taxpayer. All right, now here's where this scandal jumps from shocking to absolutely explosive, because according to federal prosecutors, investigative journalists, and now the whistleblowers themselves, the fraud inside of Minnesota wasn't just staying in Minnesota. Massive sums, I'm talking tens of millions of dollars at a time, were allegedly routed overseas, much of it to Somalia, through cash couriers, informal wire systems, and Hawala-style transfer networks that investigators say are notoriously difficult to trace. Now, I want you to think about this just for a second, okay? This is money that was meant to feed children in Minneapolis. This was allegedly being vacuumed out of the country through channels that the Treasury Department has warned about for years. City Journal called Minnesota a cash pipeline to Somalia. The New York Post reported that funds were converted to cash and then moved overseas. And the whistleblowers are saying that Walz's administration knew that these networks were operating. Now, if that is true, the scandal isn't local, it's international. And so, before the newest claims, and let me be very clear, these claims are coming from analysts, journalists, and federal investigators, not these internet rumors. They're suggesting that some portion of the stolen Minnesota funds may have traveled through financial channels that are used by extremist groups, including Al-Shabaab, the Somali-based terrorist organization responsible for attacks across East Africa. Now, City Journal's reports warned that the same Hawala corridors used to transport stolen welfare dollars, they have historically been used by the very groups that are tied to militant networks. Treasury officials under President Trump, they have said that they're now reviewing whether any Minnesota-linked transfers intersected with terror finance red flags. So no one is claiming that Walz intentionally funded these extremists. That's not what I'm saying. But the allegation that his failures enable these pathways, well, that is politically and nationally devastating. Now let's talk about something that's even more disturbing than the fraud itself, shall we? How Tim Walz allegedly reacted when honest state employees tried to stop it. Because according to this viral whistleblower post, and remember, this isn't one or two disgruntled staffers. This is over 480 DHS workers, okay? The governor's office didn't just ignore fraud reports. They punished anyone who filed them. Whistleblowers claim careers were threatened. Investigators were sidelined, reports were buried, employees were monitored, whatever that means. probably more micromanagement. Even some say that their families were targeted with intimidation tactics. That's not negligence. That's not oversight failure. That is a coordinated retaliation network designed to protect the very fraud rings that these employees were trying to expose. In fact, the workers describe a system where telling the truth meant risking your livelihood, your job, and staying silent meant enabling corruption. So what do? If even half of this is true, Waltz wasn't asleep at the steering wheel. He was welding the steering wheel shut. And this is where the political volcano erupts. I mean, thanks to revelations from the New York Times, we now know that internal investigators warned Governor Waltz about the fraud years before it even became national news. But according to officials inside the Attorney General's office, Waltz feared that cracking down on nonprofits tied to Minnesota's Somali community would risk alienating a core Democratic voting bloc. Now let that sink in for a second, okay? Investigations delayed, audits ignored, warning signs dismissed, all to avoid political backlash. Whistleblowers say that this wasn't incompetence, this was calculation. Waltz allegedly prioritized protecting his political coalition over protecting taxpayer money. And the moment that staff pushed a little bit too hard, he shut him down. This turns the scandal from mismanagement into intentional political shielding of fraudulent networks. And under President Trump's DOJ, that motive is about to become a legal problem. Now, let's revisit the moment that the entire country watched Tim Waltz break on national television. Because when he sat down on Meet the Press, every political insider already knew that he had been forced to address this billion-dollar scandal, but no one, including the White House press corps, expected the meltdown that unfolded live on air. Pressed on why Minnesota suffered the largest welfare fraud scandal in U.S. history, Waltz didn't just take responsibility like a man. He didn't apologize. Instead, he delivered one of the most incoherent pivots ever broadcast. He blamed national politics. He blamed inspector general cuts. He blamed prosperity for attracting criminals. He even claimed Minnesota's success made it a magnet for fraudsters. Now, at one point, he tried claiming that he takes responsibility for putting people in jail. This is a comment that instantly went viral because it answered none of the accusations. What the heck is this guy even talking about? Is he senile? This was the clearest sign yet. Waltz wasn't leading Minnesota. Waltz was drowning in scandal. And listen, before we move on to President Trump's reaction to this, because that part gets really wild, I need to tell you about something that honestly shook me this week. So a 61-year-old woman tried to refill her medication, and the pharmacist told her that she already had in Texas. And she's never been to Texas, not even once. That is medical identity theft, and it shows just how deep this problem goes in America right now. It's no longer just the credit cards or bank accounts. Criminals are now using people's medical information, prescriptions, insurance, even doctor visits. This is why LifeLock matters. You see, LifeLock monitors more than just your credit. They track your identity across places you'd never think anyone could reach. And with 30 days for free, you can actually see the threats long before they turn into financial chaos. Now, most people don't just assume that they're safe anymore. Most people protect themselves. Because in a world where even your prescriptions can be stolen, doing nothing isn't an option. Click the link in the description down below and get your free 30-day trial today. All right, so let's get back into President Trump's response because he didn't hold anything back. And so if Walt's meltdown was the spark, President Donald J. Trump's response, this was the explosion. So when asked directly about Tim Waltz's conduct, the fraud, the cover-ups, the overseas money transfers, President Trump didn't hold back. He said what millions were already thinking. There's something really wrong with him. Trump accused Tim Waltz of allowing criminals into the state, allowing billions in taxpayer dollars to disappear, and then failing to protect Minnesotans from the largest public funds fraud scheme that America's ever seen. And the way he said it, calm, direct, with that classic Trump cadence, kind of sent this clip viral across every major platform. Conservative media ran it nonstop. Even mainstream news outlets repeated it because the soundbite was just too devastating to ignore. Now, for Waltz, already cracking under pressure, Trump's response wasn't criticism, or at least it wasn't just criticism. This was a national verdict. And so now here's where the ground really begins to shake beneath Tim Waltz, because the scandal is no longer contained inside of Minnesota. It's now a full-blown federal investigation, and the Trump administration, they're treating it as the largest welfare fraud case in U.S. history. Look, federal prosecutors, they've already charged 78 defendants, and officials are saying more indictments are coming. Investigators describe this fraud network as complex, organized, and operating across multiple nonprofit fronts. We're talking shell restaurants and cash transfer systems. They're attacking international money laundering trails, missing millions, and cross-border cross-border transfers that may intersect with foreign criminal groups. And what's most damaging for Waltz is this. Federal prosecutors say that the fraud thrived because oversight inside Minnesota collapsed. In private briefings, DOJ officials reportedly described Minnesota as a case study in systemic failure. And of course, every time investigators peel back another layer, the trail just keeps pointing back to the same office, Tim Waltz's office. And so to understand how this scandal grew into a billion-dollar catastrophe, you really need to understand what Minnesota became under Tim Waltz, a fraud magnet. Now, overnight, oversight didn't weaken, it practically evaporated. During COVID, the state's welfare and nutrition programs, they ballooned overnight. Nonprofits were approved with almost zero verification. Audits were waived, site checks vanished, paperwork standards collapsed. And in that chaos, fraudsters thrived. The clearest proof? One key defendant, Usman Shamira, had been kicked out of SNAP in 2015 for suspected fraud. Yet, under Waltz's administration, he was welcomed back with open arms and a brand new child nutrition program, where he allegedly stole even more. Now, this is not being fooled twice. This is clearly systemic dereliction. I mean, Minnesota's DHS became so dysfunctional, prosecutors actually say that the fraud networks operated like open air markets, each one feeding off relaxed oversight and political negligence. Waltz didn't just oversee a broken system, he oversaw a gold rush for criminals. And so as this scandal explodes across the country, conservative media has settled on a phrase that perfectly, essentially captures what just happened. Minnesota's Watergate. And honestly, it's not an exaggeration, because Watergate wasn't just about a crime. It was about the cover-up, the retaliation, the abuse of power, a corruption at the top. And this is exactly what commentators are saying is happening with the Waltz administration. They're watching the whistleblower revolt, the retaliatory culture inside DHS, the politically protected nonprofits, the ignored audits, the buried reports, the billion-dollar losses, and now the allegations of international transfers. And they're saying that this is the biggest government-funded fraud network in modern American history. And so even without the terror funding angle, the scandal is still massive, but with the overseas funneling, with the Hawala networks, with federal investigators acting or asking national security questions, yeah, this isn't just fraud, folks. This is Minnesota's Watergate, and it's detonating under Waltz in real time. And finally, what does this mean for the national level? Now that President Donald J. Trump is president again, well, it means that the entire machinery of the federal government is shifting its weight onto the scandal that Trump's DOJ has reopened these long dormant oversight offices. So check this out. So the Treasury is now pulling the Hawala transfer flags from the last 5 years. They're going deep. DHS is mapping international money trails. The FBI is reviewing whether Minnesota's fraud networks intersected with foreign criminal or extremist operations. And multiple agencies are preparing new rounds of indictments, all while Walt's inner circle is reportedly scrambling. They're lawyering up, they're bracing for subpoenas. For years, Minnesota leaders thought that the scandal would stay quiet, it would stay local, it would stay contained, but the era is over. This is a new administration, one that's not afraid to call corruption what it is or follow the money wherever it leads. And now the billion-dollar truth is finally catching up to Tim Waltz.